Now, we like to think of ourselves as the BBC's diplomatic service here in This Week, so in that spirit we decided to host a dinner for Jean-Claude Juncker, El Presidente of the EU Commission. Things between Theresa May and JC have been a little tense of late, so we stepped in, hoping to smooth things over. But ever since our dinner, Mr Juncker has been on the warpath, calling us delusional, spreading fake news in the continental press, and even criticising our toad in the hole. He claimed that he was forced to drink lukewarm German white wine while some loony in a crazy shirt droned endlessly about the 8:46 a.m. milk train from Barton and the Beans to Nether-upon-Wallop. Apparently, the only thing he enjoyed was the after-party with Pete Doherty and Big Nasty, which probably explains why we've run out of cognac. Here's the FT's Lionel Barber with his take of the week.
Choices, choices. With just 3 days to go before France chooses between two presidential candidates. One, a centrist called Macron, another who threatens to eat the EU for breakfast. For Brussels, the election of Marine Le Pen would be an outcome worse than Brexit. Consider then the message that a successful Brexit, as Theresa May wants, would send. When the going gets tough, you simply quit. That's why Brussels insists that we need to wake up and smell the coffee. The price of Brexit has to be high pour décourager les autres.
I can make you ice cream, we could be a sweet tea.
I've met Jean-Claude Juncker many times. He spent his whole career building Europe. So if his team did actually leak all those rotten details about that meal, maybe it was all about popping the bubble of expectations in London.
I can spell what you can say.
So, a brutal reality check. Distrust is getting higher, the gap's getting wider, and now the Prime Minister has accused Brussels of interfering in our election. This week's kerfuffle should be a wake-up call to both sides. But each believe it holds the trump card. The EU knows Britain is running against the clock to reach a financial settlement before a trade deal. But some in May's cabinet believe we can simply walk away, bringing the temple down like Samson.
Let me give you what you'd like.
Perhaps the mood will shift, but my experience is that it will be impossible to avoid making a meal of negotiations.
Show me what you're here for, guy.
Juncker has got to balance the interests of 27 other member states. And every country has a pet cause. It's like enlargement in reverse. So we're in for months of trench warfare. Britain needs a battle-hardened Prime Minister. So that's why she called a general election.
And from the FT canteen, where it's fashionable to eat baked beans with your croissant, Lionel Barber joins us now. Welcome.
It wasn't good, Andrew.
Oh, it looked good. I've made me quite hungry. Now, using the Financial Times to float a ludicrous €100 billion Brexit bill, briefing against the Prime Minister after she came to dinner, saying Mrs May can't do her own negotiations, trying to undermine David Davis. Is the Brussels Commission out of control?
No, they're just distinguished between the comprehensive, malicious leak from either Jean-Claude Juncker or his chief of staff, where everything about a private dinner
was revealed.
That's different from what we produced, which was our €100 billion story, which was meticulously put together.
But it was guided by the Commission.
No. Lots of other stories. No, that's the big story, Andrew. It's not the Commission that's come up with this higher number. It's actually other member states, Poland, Germany, France.
Right, but still guided and encouraged by the Commission to do this.
Well, we don't seek permission, Andrew, to publish our stories from the Commission.
You shouldn't seek permission from anybody, but when you look at it all together, I mean, are they so out of touch that they think this is going to weaken Mrs May? I mean, don't they realise that they're actually becoming her recruiting sergeant?
Yeah, I think that leak to the German newspaper of the whole dinner was utterly misguided, fundamental misunderstanding of the reaction that it would provoke in London, and as you say, Andrew, helps Mrs May.
Michael?
Absolutely, but it helps Mrs May. She must be very pleased. And by the way, she was bold. She seized the opportunity. That address in Downing Street when she returned from seeing the Queen
surprised us.
It was a terrific move. It took people's breath away. But I think more than that, I think it may have scuppered the negotiation, because you can perfectly imagine, you know, that the British government might get away at the end of the day with a deal that cost it, I don't know, let's say 25 billion or something. So if the European Commission had begun with 40 billion, they could have settled at 25, we could have settled, everything would have been fine. But now 100 billion, of course, the British have got to say, well, this is preposterous and we don't see why we should pay anything. And how can the European Commission now settle at a figure that will be, you know, less than half, possibly only a small fraction of the 100 billion? I think it may have scuppered the whole thing from top to bottom.
Would Labour contemplate anything like 100 billion?
Well, you start by trying to get the best deal for Britain, and that's as low a figure as possible. But, of course, there might be some compromise in there in order to get the right outcome on things like immigration, on jobs, on the economy.
But would it contemplate anything like 100 billion?
Well, it sounds like... To me, this sounds like posturing at the outset of negotiations. And I think Michael might well be right about how difficult this has now become. I mean, the difficulty is that I think it's pretty clear that this works for Theresa May on an electoral level, because she obviously wants to try and project herself as a very strong leader. It just doesn't work at all for the British public. I think it's been fairly catastrophic to have ended up in a place where we're having a slanging match with the very people that we need to bring on side.
But who's responsible for that slanging match?
Decent deal.
I mean, why is it catastrophic? I mean, Mrs May made it clear in her Lancaster House speech that she wanted the EU to succeed. She didn't want the EU to be brought down. She wanted it to do well without Britain. She wanted the closest possible relationships with the EU. She wanted free trade. She wanted defence and security. And she wanted a great relationship going forward. So she didn't start the slanging match.
No, I mean, she made it clear in that speech how high the stakes are for the people of this country. But the problem is how we've ended up here in a situation where we have managed to... Well, I think it goes right back to a government that took a crisis in the Conservative Party and turned it into a national crisis by calling a referendum without thinking at all about what to do in the event of a Leave vote.
That is a lot of water under the bridge. We'll go back to the referendum. Do you agree with Michael that they may have blown it by talking about 100 billion?
First skirmish in what's going to be a protracted trench warfare. The fact is, it's way too early to say that the negotiations have been scuppered. What we do know is that there's always horrible arguments lasting through the nights, endless months of negotiations over money. It's always been the case. Second point, 100 billion is a gross figure. There's a whole load of other assets that we have access to building. This is a gross figure. There will be a net figure.
Except the Commission was briefing we had no right to these assets.
When I had lunch, not baked beans, by the way, Andrew, when I had lunch with Jean-Claude Juncker about 6 weeks ago...
Foie gras.
Actually, there was no foie gras. It's a little bit of white wine. No red for the president, by the way, just in case you were thinking. He used the figure 60 billion, not 100 billion. So I think these figures are loose. This was the gross big figure. It's going to come down. Last point, Andrew, you and I know that these are going to be paid in instalments. It's not like we're going to hand over 100 billion euros in cash on day one of Brexit.
It's like reparations, paid over lots of years.
Well, the reparations, indeed, that metaphor has been used.
Yeah, well, it has been used, and it's very appropriate.
But it sounds like.
But the purpose of...
there is going to be a divorce bill,
But the purpose of reparations was really, above all, motivated by the French in the Treaty of Versailles to give Germany a punishment beating. That's what that was. 100 billion sounds like a punishment beating for us. And I think surely it's inconceivable that any British government could agree to a figure anywhere close to that, even if it is on the never-never.
I don't... What we'll end up with, I don't know, 50 billion over 10 years? That's eminently payable.
Why would we pay 50 billion?
Well, we have certain obligations under our current arrangement, we've signed up to a budget which goes through 2020.
But only to 2020.
Yeah, that is
well, that's
correct.
another.
But there
net.
are other. There are,
that's
what about
a net
the loans?
$8 billion.
Well, what about the? It's not just. It's these are infrastructure projects that go beyond 2020.
Well, maybe that shouldn't be our responsibility.
No, well, so you just, it's the bridge to nowhere that you cut off halfway through. No, there is going to be...
No, it's the bridge that takes a bit longer to build.
There are some projects which we're going to have to... We're going to have to pay, probably, for access to the single market. This has been floated by the
May I just say, I think it's really depressing that a British newspaper has decided on this already. The British newspaper has decided that Britain has to... No, what do you mean you haven't? You've just said it 12 times. We have to pay. We have to pay.
Deciding,
we have these obligations. You're meant to be a British newspaper. Where's the national interest in all of this?
Well, do you think... Is that what our job is, to sort of... We're an international...
You clearly don't think it is.
No, we're an international newspaper.
You've already settled your point.
We don't carry
Britain
water.
has to pay.
Michael.
Well, that is not the position of the British government or the British people.
So there's no there's no liability whatsoever. Is that what you're saying, Michael?
I don't accept one yet.
Do you know what we do? We don't carry flags around when we're reporting for the BBC, for the FT. What we do is report the facts.
No, you
right?
don't.
And we don't just report.
No, you are the Daily Remainer.
No, actually, read our editorial, Michael.
I read your newspaper. You actually
Michael,
exclude
pro-Brexit Michael,
copy.
that is a complete distortion of our editorial
Let me bring
on Remain. That is not correct.
Isn't there a danger, though, for Remain newspapers like the Financial Times and for the opposition, that whenever there's a bit of a bust-up between Brussels and London, you're seen to be siding with the other side? Isn't that a political risk for you?
The thing that interests me, actually, is what the risk is for the people that I represent in Wigan. And the truth is that I have a major employer in my constituency who have to constantly reassess the political situation and decide whether it's in their interests to be based in the UK and how many jobs they have here. And I cannot imagine what they must be thinking, listening to this, listening to Theresa May, listening to Juncker, listening to this incredibly aggressive, quite gratuitous row being played out through national and international newspapers. When you contrast the way that Theresa May is behaving towards those other 27 European countries with the way that she fawned over Donald Trump recently on a trip to America, I cannot see in whose interest this is except her own.
So if Labour had been in power, there would have been no response to this extraordinary provocation from the European Union.
Why are we in this situation, Michael? We're in this situation
because the European Union has
consistently your
tried to interfere in our election.
Has isolated itself in Europe amongst a group of nations with whom we have cooperated on peace, on security,
you lost that
on the environment.
During the 2013.
And let me remind you...
Hang on, I absolutely accept that
the verdict of the British people.
The verdict was to leave the European Union, and we are leaving.
You almost forgot to say.
By the way, that is why...
I didn't forget to say it. I want the best possible outcome, and I haven't seen anything from the behaviour of Theresa May this week.
That's also why when we are not,
agrees.
it is incorrect to say that we're a Remain newspaper. We're not.
Well, let me leave the FT for a moment and come back to this more general point. I mean, as you began by saying, these are early days. Everybody's jockeying for position. People were probably saying things at the moment that they will come to regret later on when they're on both sides, when the negotiations get underway. And when you cut it through, can't you see the makings of a deal, that there will be some divorce bill, size to be determined, probably under 50 billion, maybe between 30 and 50. And in return for that, there will be a generous free trade agreement with the EU. Isn't that the architecture of a deal?
That is the architecture of the deal. And again, it's important to say that we believe that the European Union is wrong in arguing, the Commission is wrong in saying that you have to have a comprehensive deal on the money and one or two other things, the EU citizens' rights. They could start negotiation on a free trade deal, the framework. They shouldn't just say that goes in a box until anything else is settled. What we also know, Andrew, as part of the deal, is that we're almost certainly going to have to stay in the single market beyond 2020 as a part of a transition agreement. Before we get a sensible deal, trade deal that's good for Britain.
All right. We'll leave it there.